The first event of the weekend was a battle on the beach, and this involved most of the troops in the reenactment. Originally, the engagement did not involve all of the troops. It was just detachments from both sides, but we escalated this to turn into a general engagement. What you're seeing with the beach battle is an initial engagement by just a very few troops. The hunting party versus some Indians and some Rangers on the British side. And then it escalates. Both commanders are feeding extra troops into the battle until it becomes a general action. We had naval support offshore. Basically, the British Rangers, the Indians, provincial troops, and eventually regulars were coming out of the woods and driving the French soldiers back toward the fort. Originally, the hunting party was small. Most of them were captured by the British Allied Indians. Captain Pouchot sent a party of troops out to find out what was happening, and there was some action between those groups. Part of the troops eventually retreated to the fort. So we recreated this on a much larger scale, involving the bulk of both armies. Of course, the French are outnumbered, so they're eventually going to have to give ground and make their way back toward the fort. But they don't just flee to the fort in a disorganized manner. They're fighting a very organized retreat. And again, this was much larger scale than actually the original occurred in 1759. Most of the American Indians that were involved in this campaign were on the British side. And that represented a significant reversal of alliances. The Iroquois had always been, throughout the war, pretty much either lukewarm or divided toward the English in particular. A lot of the Senecas and the Cayugas supported the French early in the war. They were living closest to the French here at Niagara, and they were going on raiding parties and actually helping the French. As the war continued, in winter of 1758-59, there was a shift in the loyalty of many of these Western Iroquois, and they began to go over to the English interest. This campaign was the strongest support shown by the Iroquois during the whole war, almost 1,000 warriors in the field. So natives participating on both sides, playing a very significant role. They played a critical role in the outcome. I think sometimes their role is underappreciated, and we tried to portray that during the course of this event. We had several councils between the British and the American Indians, between the French and the American Indians, just showing how important their support was. There's a lot of diplomatic effort put forward to gain alliances with native nations. It didn't take long for Captain Pouchot to figure out that this was a major attack. This wasn't just an Indian raid by the Iroquois who were allied to the British. This was serious business. Very shortly, pretty much the next day, he began to set the fort up to withstand a siege. The assault on Saturday afternoon was the first time that the British actually tried to assault the works of the fort. The other battles were preliminary. They were fought out in Fort Niagara State Park in pretty much open ground. So now the British come up against the French defenses. And of course, in 1759, they didn't assault the fort over open ground. So this again is a demonstration that shows how that might have happened. But it really didn't happen in 1759. The British stuck to their trenches, they dug, and they got close enough that they could fire their muskets from the trenches at the French, and vice versa. But there was not an infantry attack over open ground. So this is more of a demonstration than a recreation of something that actually happened. But the British are advancing on both flanks, and they get up to the French works. They make some progress, but the French garrison is still strong enough that they're able to repulse this initial attack. This demonstrates for the public, I think, why you didn't advance over open ground, because, of course, the British are advancing over this cleared field known as the glacis. The French are all behind cover in the ravelin and the lunettes, and they're able to maintain their position. There are different sizes and kinds of artillery in use. Guns are the long-barreled variety that fire a solid iron ball at a target. This can either be infantry or, in the case of the siege, they're aiming at the walls of the fort. The heaviest guns the British had were 18-pounders. These were fairly large guns for a campaign this far in the wilderness. They weren't especially large guns where siege artillery was concerned, much better defended than they had fought. So they were a little bit surprised, and they realized maybe they didn't bring enough ordnance with them to do the job. But they kept at it. They also had 12-pounders, and they had 6-pounders. What that refers to is the weight of the shot that they're firing. A 6-pounder, for example, is a gun that could travel around with infantry on the field, sort of a mid-size weapon. They also, as I mentioned before, had mortars. They had howitzers, and these lobbed bombs over the wall. They had fuses that would be cut to a certain length and designed to explode either above the heads of the French defenders or once they got inside the fort.